Hello. Well, those lights are a little bit blinding, aren't they? Look, we have people. It's actually very exciting to have this group of panelists to talk to today. I work with banned books and against censorship all the time, and not with such great talent, just with regular people. So hearing the ideas from this crowd is really important. I'd like you each to introduce yourselves for just a couple of minutes, if you would. Shall we start with Oni, since you're at the far end?
Good afternoon. My name is Oni Blair, and I am proud to lead the American Civil Liberties Union of Texas, the ACLU of Texas, as the executive director for the state. As the introduction mentioned earlier, we work on a number of issues, including voting rights, reproductive rights, immigration, LGBTQIA rights, and what we are most known for, free speech. And prior to serving as the executive director of the ACLU, I worked in justice issues here in Texas, and I was a foreign service officer, so a US diplomat, working on human rights issues internationally, but particularly in the Middle East and South Asia.
Salil.
Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Salil Tripathi, born in Bombay, and now in Brooklyn, and very happy to be in Houston. I'm on the board of PEN International, which is different from PEN America. We work very closely with one another, of course, and I chair the Writers in Prison Committee, which basically tries to people out of jail, people who are writers, and keep them away from risk. We have a strong program for freedom to read, which resonates a lot in Texas and Florida and other parts of the US, and freedom to write, which affects everywhere else. And I've written a lot on censorship and free speech in Asia and the US. I'm delighted to be part.
Tony.
Thank you. Well, you heard my bio, so that's facts you can Google. What I want to add to that is why I'm here. Because my folks were migrant workers. I'm the last of 9 kids. My first language was Spanish. As you can tell, my English is spectacular now. But let's make no mistake. I am an example of when youth that don't, I used to hear this phrase in school, it's not who you know. I mean, it's not what you know, it's who you know. My folks did not know anyone who had gone to college, did not know professionals. So when I would hear that, I knew the cards were stacked against me. However, my folks, and like my father would say in Spanish, and his broken English later, I'm breaking my back so you can go to school, you can study, so you don't have to break your back working. And what's going on right now is there are forces at work that have created a censorship culture. They don't want this panel to happen. They don't want us to convene in a mind-boggling, beautiful, diverse way that they don't get, and they can't stop. However, let's get something clear. If anybody is on the sidelines, if anybody doesn't understand why we're making this a big deal, you need to remind them that access to the American dream through education is at stake. And we're no longer in a country where a migrant family's son can go to school or a library and get access to world-class education. That's at stake right now. That's really what we're up against. We're going to depress you. We're going to depress you a little bit, but you're going to leave fired up, and you're part of this movement.
Thank you. Yes, you are going to leave fired up. So this is the Asia Society building, and we have an Asian person here, representative, I guess. So Salil, would you open us? When I first contacted first got the list of panelists and the invitation to be here today, I reached out to everyone to kind of get a sense of who they were because I've never met them before today. It's lovely. Anyway, Salil answered me with a quote, "U.S. bans are not as effective as those in India or Singapore because the bans here are local and in private or regional government." So I wonder if you could expand on that a little bit, because I have to say from where I sit, they don't feel less effective.
So I'll speak as an insider, outsider here, of course. I've lived in Singapore 8 years and seen books being banned by the state, and you can't bring them in, and if they bring into the country, you could go to jail and pay a fine. Similarly, in India, if you end up having a book which is banned, and if it is known, it can cause you in serious trouble. The other kind of problem you do have in Asia with bans is not so much that state enforcement may be a bit lax, but what happens is the voice of the tyrannical minority or even majority in some cases, where writers are beaten up, lynched, and sometimes killed. I mean, in the last 6 years, 4 amazing rationalist writers have been murdered. M.M. Kalburgi, Narendra Dabholkar, Gobind Pansare, Gauri Lankesh, shot by people on the streets. So yes, of course, there is a gun culture in the US, and of course, I'm aware of that. But I haven't known of cases of someone rushing up with the terrible example of what happened to Salman Rushdie last year. Other than that, I don't see an example of physical attacks on a writer. And yes, books can be banned here, and of course, school boards have an enormous power. But if I go to a Barnes & Noble, there's a counter saying, these are the books banned in your school board, you can buy them here. And there are people who buy them and send them directly to students. So that gives me hope in a way that there is a resistance building, and that resistance is fearless. I'm not saying that the resistance in Asia is fearful, but the stakes sometimes are higher there because the state actually penalizes you, jails you, and sometimes tortures you. That at least hasn't happened here, and it may never happen in America.
Which is why you need to leave here fired up, right, Tony?
Absolutely.
So Tony has lots of experience with censorship that is both blatant and sometimes more subtle. So I was reading, I didn't get to finish the book, but I read the start of your pyramid book.
I appreciate that.
I just got it on Monday, so. Anyway, the parts I read were talking about how book banning can silence identities, and I think that's true in Asia as well, but if you would sort of expand on that and your Nuestra Palabra, the various cultures that you see are being silenced basically in the current Texas mayhem.
And I think it's a good juxtaposition, because I'm not going to get into a battle of what's more miserable, because that's terrible.
A misery is a misery, and it's terrible.
Right?
Yeah.
And censorship is censorship. However, and I'm not, that violence is direct violence, and that is wrong. We're not going to tolerate that in the United States of America. And I'm not going to pretend that I don't have privileges that someone who's not in direct danger does not, right? I am a Mexican-American. I have a master's degree. I got an American passport, and I got a big mouth, okay? And guess where I can do this? United States of America. So I'm proud to be Chicano because I can do that here. We don't want the extremes to happen, right? I also, though, don't want to make light of what you've just described, because what's at work here is a sinister attempt by forces to come back with the censorship culture, and I document some of it in my book, The Tip of the Pyramid, Cultivating Community Culture Capital. I'm only taking about 4 minutes on this, not too. And I point this out, why? Because here's what happens in America, though. America's unique brand of censorship. In 2012, right-wing Republicans banned Mexican-American studies. Most people in this room did not hear about that. What does that mean? That means in my lifetime, my history and culture was prohibited by an entire state. Now, there's other arguments that people will say, well, it wasn't stopped here, it wasn't stopped there. That's not the point of it. Censorship culture adapts to the freedoms of a nation to sabotage its intellectual freedom. That's the game that we're put under. And as I document in my book, I did not write my book in a corporate genre that would have the audacity to think, I've solved it, it's wrapped up. As I say in my book, this is cyclical in nature, and it seems to be that there are forces that have the privilege, wealth, and sinister goal to every 10 years to reboot things. So they study us, right? Again, we've been on the ground. We can't use the same tactics we used in 2012 because we won that battle. We won that battle. And I'm going to fast forward this. A 17-year-old Chicana in Tucson sued the state of Arizona, and we helped her. All of us helped her. Let me add a few things that make this sinister, and I'll pass this along. In my book, I document there were receipts where Texas right-wing Republicans, all of whom you know now, were adopting tactics from Arizona. We thwarted them. So we were able to stop them. We were able to stop that law. We were able to pass laws about Mexican-American studies. However, since that time, what has happened is the response has been, to me, sinister. Because here's what is not happening in other countries, or it's different ways, or here's our response in Texas. The right-wing forces that want to silence intellectual freedom took over the Texas Senate, the Texas House, lieutenant governorship, and governorship, and they started passing laws. We had passed laws that took years, they wiped that out. And I'm gonna stop with one specific thing in case it's too abstract. We're in the 4th largest city in America. It's 45% Latino. Right now in Houston City Council, there's 16 seats for representatives. There's one Latino, okay? There's not the state violence that is in other states, which is reprehensible. But we're in a country that's supposed to be about access, and it's denied. And I'm gonna say right now, it's through those books, access to those books, okay? And so I would say that America is very sophisticated, right? And I'll close by saying this. Why? Because all the tools that we documented in 2012, they've defied. I'll stop there.
We could all go on at some length, but you mentioned the access, and we right now in HISD have the situation where 28 schools have lost their school libraries, and another 57 are, it's questionable how much access they have to library resources. So that's banning on a whole different scale. That's not even topic or identity related. That's just saying you don't need these. We're gonna tell you what you can read. So that is definitely a problem. And you talk about the Latino representation. We just lost our election coordinator. I don't know if you've been paying attention in the audience, but Houston is, we're ground zero for the fight. We need all of your voices. So I hope I didn't steal your thunder, Ani, but I'm sure you've got plenty more. The ACLU obviously has been in this fight from the beginning and is continuing, so please carry on. We have a lot here.
So before I get into what the ACLU does, hopefully you can hear me, I want to back up just a little bit because I think it's really important to set the groundwork for why banning books is an important topic. And I think that many people who are here, you're here because you believe this or because you're interested in this and have some awareness. But I really want to emphasize, and I'll speak for myself. As a child, I was super awkward. I lived in a small town in Oklahoma. I was one of very few black students in the school and in our small town. And the school was part of a larger system of a town that was basically an oil company. So there were people from all over the world. I don't want to make it sound like a backwards town, but there weren't a lot of black students. And one of the ways that I learned about not only black history and slavery history, which is my family's history, but also of other identities was through the library and through books. Many books that are banned now. My mom would take us to the library every week. When I got older, I would make a way. I have no idea how I got to the public library, but I would get to the library and I'd hang out there and do my homework, and I'd ask the librarians for help. And when I was going through puberty, my mom gave me books like Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, to help me just not feel alone, and that I was like a late bloomer and that everything was going to be okay. And for me, books were not only an escape, but they were a way of helping me kind of unpack things that I just didn't have the language or people always around me to help me to understand what it was. I got really into reading about Holocaust history because it helped me to kind of understand oppression in a different context and losing rights and what that meant. And already at a very young age, I made the connections between Black history and Chicano history in the United States and what I read about in those books. Long before Isabel Wilkerson and Cass, I was making those connections. But that was through books that are often banned now. And now I'm a parent on top of being the head of the ACLU of Texas. And I see this every day in the work that I do with my team, but also in my own household. There is no way that even in the best system, you can cover all of the issues. And so what you allow a child to read and explore or to find out on their own, because my children are 3 very different children, their identities are still being shaped and they're gonna have experiences that I didn't have and that I'm not going to be able to explain to them. And that's where books become a huge part. So books are about identity, books are about ideas, books are about history and teaching things, and books are important to societies in understanding a complex, pluralistic society and allowing it to flourish. So on the state level, we now have not one, but 2 pieces of legislation that have really restricted the understanding of information in censored books. So in 2021, going back to what we forget from 2012, in 2021, the state passed an anti-critical race theory legislation that forbids the teaching of critical race theory. So this is understanding like intersections between different identities and race and so on. But also with that, the use of certain words. And then on top of that, what we forget is a project or a book by the New York Times called the 1619 Project was banned. And that teaches a lot about Black history and slavery and the influence on everything from our healthcare systems to the economy. That is an important book, and I was very proud to lead a discussion with the author Nicole Hannah-Jones here at Emmanuel Congregation in 2021, not long after she published her book. But then, more recently, this past legislative session in the spring passed what we call House Bill 900, or the Reader Act. Don't let the name fool you. The Reader Act, HB 900, bans a number of books based on there being sexual content or content that may be inappropriate, which is very vague. And so the ACLU has worked on both of these pieces, especially in the legislature and pushing to stop them. But more recently, we are a part of a number of coalitions that have been pushing for blocking the implementation of HB 900, including there's a lawsuit that we are not a part of, but that represents several independent bookstores, Willow Books, and book people, in addition to publishers and distributors, who have asserted that this bill not only limits their free speech, but also it's just too hard to implement. I mean, to go through all of the books in the universe and to be able to understand if there's something that may be inappropriate is it's just too broad. But more importantly, and I think that this connects to what you also said, Salil, is understanding that this is happening at the state level and it's diffused. It's happening at individual school boards and even in public libraries, whether it's the city or county library. So it makes it very difficult to understand the impact. And then finally, with all of that, I think the bigger piece is we don't have the physical violence that you mentioned happens not only in India, but in many countries around the world, including some where I've worked. But these laws have produced a chilling effect. We have teacher shortages beyond what anybody can imagine here in Houston. I have 3 children in public schools, and I feel them all the time. But on top of that, you are scaring people into not being able to talk or to speak. People are afraid to say certain words in class. They have people checking every book in their classroom, sometimes just removing all the books from the classroom and making it difficult because libraries are closed in some schools and nobody wants their library closed where they do exist. So while you don't have the physical violence, you do have the chilling effect that you see in not only the United States now, but in other countries of self-censorship because you're afraid. And that's a whole new level of intimidation and oppression that we should also be aware of that's happening here.
Well, there's a lot on the table. Do you guys have comments to exchange back and forth?
Yeah, I don't want to, I mean, I'm glad both of you placed the important but caveats to, because I didn't want to paint a very rosy picture of the US. If I conveyed that impression, that wasn't the impression. Because you've been in the Foreign Service, and we talk about certain kinds of freedoms to be acceptable, and the US to be a kind of spokesperson for the world and beacon, and talking about human rights and democracy and freedom abroad. And that ability of the US is undermined when it is found that J.K. Rowling and Kurt Vonnegut and, name author after author, topic after topic, critical race theory is a great, 1619 is another great example, not being spoken about. Because what does the autocrat in the Middle East or in Southeast Asia or South Asia have to do with that? But look at your own country. I mean, you're banning books. Now, then to give this very subtle response, yes, but it's only the school board and you can still buy it through Amazon or an independent bookstore.
If you can afford it through Amazon,
if you can afford it.
Point.
No, absolutely. Or if somebody has put it available for free and you download it illegally. I mean, but that's not the point. Even that requires certain skills and violating laws and all that. So I don't want to go there. So it severely undermines US goals of foreign policy abroad. That's something worth bearing in mind too.
The thing I would like to add too is that it is this onslaught of all these different tools because it takes a lot of energy. And I do want to talk a little bit about House Bill 900 because it is sinister. But we mentioned some of the larger attacks. Fredericksburg, there were some Librotraficantes fighting a Tea Party contingent that was stopping books there. And it's a typical profile. The students were 50% Latino. Their parents didn't speak English well. Why? Because then it was the Anglo citizens, not even parents, who were blocking these books. That's just one corner of Texas. There's so many others. Libraries, HISD is turning them into punishment, detention centers. So it's almost like so hard to keep track of. But I do want to say one thing, though, about House Bill 900. It is very sinister because it could go into effect. It's been blocked. And when it does, bookstores that sell books to schools must come up with a rating system for sexual content. And this sounds pretty straightforward until you think about it. Like, okay, is two people holding hands, is that sex? When Latinos see each other, we hug each other, kiss each other on the cheek. Is that sex? Is staring in each other's eyes, is that sex? You mentioned earlier, too, that in most slave narratives, rape will be discussed. Is that sex? So and I think the other sinister tactic is that the state puts the onus on the bookstores and the libraries, who are already understaffed. So it's almost this overwhelming assault that it's chilling, it's numbing, and it uses the resources up, which again undermines the power of the nation. So,
and it's a path of least resistance, right? I mean, when you're placing so much burden on a small bookstore, they are just going to take the easy way out. I mean, I hope they won't, and many of them don't. The number of independent bookstores that used to display satanic verses, I mean, my salute to them in those horrible days. But we are in a very intimidatory climate where it's not that simple to do so, and it's hugely problematic.
The financial impact on the bookstores is going to be hellacious if this goes through. I mean, because they have to go back and track years before what they have sold to schools and somehow get those books back. And when I was still working as a librarian, I bought books from Blue Willow all the time. Half of them made it to the library, half of them stayed in my house. How are they going to track that? And I'm not in a school anymore, but I mean, it is completely untenable. But if we think about where we are today, here, talking about banned books, how can we take energy from all this depressing information and push forward. I was telling Tony a little bit before that I'm going to a lot of school board and related meetings, and I'm leaving many of them nearly in tears, because hearing from the teachers in particular, but the other night, Thursday night at the school board, there were 7th grade students there talking about how awful their class day is right now. I'm upset, so I can go hide in a corner and cry. So far, I'm not doing that. I'm taking energy from it. But it would be nice to have some inspiration. I thought we were going to have somebody telling me the time. We didn't. Okay, I didn't know. Well, I just didn't know what time we started, so I'm like, okay.
Well, I want to just jump in and put a little bit of urgency, and again, going back to what you said, Salil, creating this connection between what happens in places outside of the United States and what happens in the United States is very important for 2 reasons. One, we can see this as a harbinger for things to come if we understand that restrictions on books lead to broader restrictions on free speech, which we are already seeing, whether it's hair or dress codes or anything else, that really affect people who are non-white, non-Christian, and even just not identifying as male. You see it in everything from dress codes around the state in different schools to the hair code. While the Crown Act was just passed and implemented on September 1st, there are already people who should be protected under the law who are being suspended from school for that, and other things to come. So I think that there's that one piece. But 2, the hypocrisy of the United States, and I feel very comfortable in saying that as someone who used to be a former diplomat, and I see other former diplomats in the audience. It is very difficult to do your job when you are supposed to be espousing certain principles and values based on human rights, knowing that you and your family or friends or other people around you are not given those same privileges in a country that says that they belong to everyone. And this is not new. I mean, the United States went through this in the civil rights movement, for an example, which became the international pressure and the hypocrisy of the United States in equality and democracy, and the United States being unable to demonstrate for all people in the United States became a huge part of its willingness to move forward in actually granting full citizenship rights to non-white persons in the United States. So it is critically important for the United States to be a partner and to espouse democracy, or even capitalism for that matter, and having access to it abroad, if that's what the United States wants to do. It has to actually do that at home, and that includes having free speech for everyone. So what can you do about it? Well, first is understand that this is a big freaking deal. Like, it's not a joke. It's not just some books that some kids can't read. It is a very big deal, and understanding that, first and foremost, is super important. Talking about it with people so that they understand also that closing a library for schools means kids can't search the internet, which is, free speech and exploration. They can't read books about themselves or others. They're not going to understand experiences that may be their own on their sexuality and gender because they don't have an outlet for them. That's a big deal, and understanding that is truly, truly important because there's so many people who are not connecting the dots right now. And then getting involved in whatever way that may be, whether it's providing books, providing access, showing up at a school board meeting, all of those things are important. For the ACLU, we've filed a lot of complaints. Granbury ISD is one of them where the superintendent said LGBTQ persons and their identities are not something we'll be talking about in their school district. We filed a complaint with the Department of Education. We've done it at other places. For a Houston Independent School District, we filed a complaint with the Department of Justice asserting that people's voting rights were violated. Because when you fire a school board, which is part of this whole, censorship piece, they are also a part of who gets to decide the books. You are violating not only the families of the 200,000 students who are in the 8th largest school district in the country, but all the other people who pay taxes and also voted for the school board. And that is a voting rights violation. And those are big ways to get involved, but showing up at your local school board meeting or later on and making a big deal about this at the legislature is something that anybody can do at any time.
So I know there is this Godwin's law, right, where that you don't invoke images of Nazi Germany because you're cheapening the experience. But I just want to give a word picture of Bebelplatz in Berlin, which is one of my most moving places that I've been to. It's a big public square opposite Humboldt University. And there is a square of about 3 feet by 3 feet glass window, glass casing on the floor. And beneath there are white bookshelves, and they're empty. And they're empty because that's where the Nazis burned the books of Jewish science and gay science and leftist writing and all of that in 1938 when Kristallnacht started. Now, that is a kind of scenario that can happen if book burnings are acceptable, if books and ideas that cannot be read are made more permissible and acceptable. And these things creep in. These things don't happen overnight. They happen step by step by step. And you know, what was that phrase? Eternal vigilance is the cost of liberty, right? From the revolution in the US. I think that's the way to go forward. We have to prevent those moments because the books can't be burned. Because what was it that Heinrich Heine said? Now, this sounds apoplectic, and I don't mean to say that, but he did say that first they burn books, then they burn people. And we have to keep that in mind.
I'll give you a specific event to attend, some 3 practices to implement, but I do want to let you know that we're going to win this. I have no doubt. I've been involved in some of these movements, so I want to, you know, I've mentioned that we as Latinos are underrepresented in some ways. We're powerful in others, and that's what happens is we as people get convinced we're not powerful. I get excited when I convene with other folks like this. It inspires me. And when I heard from my fellow crew members from Nuestra Palabra, which I founded in 1998, this is 2012, it was humiliating and enraging to know that our history and culture, which we fought so hard, like you described, just to hear some of it, that it was banned. And you know, the stereotype of the young Chicano is the mad young Chicano. We got a lot of reasons. I mean, it's like there's a long list of stuff to be mad at. Yeah. The books I've been exposed to, the art I've been exposed to, helps take that energy and fuel it. And then Brian Parras, Liana Lopez, Lupe Mendez, who's now Texas Poet Laureate, and Laura Costa, we had been working together at that time for 14 years. And what we decided, we said, you know what? If they're going to ban our culture, we're going to smuggle it back. If they're going to ban our history, we'll make more history. And we became Librotraficante's book smugglers. And at un party, it was a cool party. So, you know what? The folks that hate intellectual freedom, they see us. They don't understand why we are excited, why we're happy. It was fun to defy the book banners, you know? And really, they're not as smart as us either, okay? They're not. You know? We're creative. We organized in 8 weeks a 6-city caravan. We smuggled $20,000 worth of books back into Tucson. We created underground libraries, and we basically took what we used to do in Houston and put a show on the road, and we're good at that. And we had zero money, zero budget. Thank you very much. You know? Yeah. And I guess what I'll close with is the party continues. So now what we're doing, we are continuing to support underground libraries, and family libraries. So on Monday, September 25th, if you've got time, you can go to nuestrapalabra.org. We're going to have a live event with Harris County Commissioner Leslie Briones. We have an NEA grant. We're giving away 400 copies of the book Infinite Country. So you come, you get a free book written by Colombian-American Patricia Engel. The first 100 folks, because we're trying to get people there on time. First 100 folks get this. This is the Nuestra Palabra Journal. This is basically created by a Venezuelan businesswoman who's here in Houston now. Completely sustainable, every part of it. It's beautiful, but it's a work of art. But here's the main thing, and I want to close with this. When folks open this, it says, tell your story. And when people fill this out, we want them on our radio show, at our readings, because at the end of the day, if you tell your story, you have defied the book banners. If you tell your story, we become richer and wiser. And if you tell a story, we've begun to win. Thank you so much. Look forward to team. You're part of the counter movement now.
Salil.
Yeah, I'll be very quick. No, I'll be very quick, but one other great thing all of us can do, you don't have to be writers. is to do public readings of books that are banned. We've done that often in India. We've done it in London. We read from Satanic Verses after he was attacked one more time, when Salman Rushdie was attacked one more time. Just go on a soapbox and start reading out. People did it with Ulysses a century ago when it was published and when it was banned under the US Postal Act. And I think it's possible to do that. And that way it can be seized back and the words remain in public, as in the end of Fahrenheit 451, you know, that film.
And you'd be surprised how many books are banned
Yep.
somewhere
Yes.
in the
No, no,
United States.
you would.
So
Pen
you
America
can
says-
find anything.
No, PEN America says 1,325 books have been banned in the last 5 years in the US, and 2,400 individual instances of bans have taken place.
I feel like we should add, for a moment this week, KDISD banned
Doctors,
Dr.
The
Seuss, but they also
crayons.
banned The Day the Crayons Quit. Because the peach crayon takes off its wrapper at the end of the story. They replaced it, but I'm just trying to give you a sense of how ludicrous this conversation has become.
the one thing I want to add is that every one of you has a voice, and you talk to people every day who probably don't agree with the ideas that we've presented today. If every one of us fights back in those little conversations, in addition to going to the school board and going to Nuestra Palabra and supporting the ACLU in whatever way you can, we each play a role, and our voices individually add up, even when they're one-on-one, randomly in the neighborhood, in the grocery store, wherever it comes up. You have a role to play. Now, do we have time for a couple of questions? Nope, we're done. Well, you have your job. Thank you to our panelists.
Thank you, Dorcas.